Maribel, hi. We're here on LinkedIn Live.
We are. We're going to talk about AI and customer experience and all sorts of fun stuff. Glad to see you.
All sorts of fun stuff. Favorite conversation with one of my favorite people. It's kind of like experience gossip. Maybe that's what we'll call the show. Who knows? It's like gossiping around experience. But I wanted to start someplace because if given a chance, you and I will take this conversation into about like 90 different directions. So I wanted to kind of anchor it in one. Let's anchor it first, and then we can go in 90 directions. Because I think a lot of people, when we start to talk about experience delivery, customer experience, the technologies that we need to underpin it, we kind of talk around the same things. We've been doing that for a little while now. And one of the things that always comes up is this concept of we've got to deliver real-time experiences. And I think that we often get that wrong. At least that's where I tend to come at that from, right? Like trying to deliver real-time experiences, it gets a little creepy. It's really hard to do. But you talk about something, and I want to start here. You actually talk about right-time experiences. Yeah. Right. And how do we deliver that RTE, and what do we need to be able to do that? So let's start there. What is it? What should we be talking about? And why is this kind of the more, let's call it the sane approach to delivering these?
Yeah. And in some ways, you're right. It's kind of nuanced, right? So right information, right person, right time on their device of choice, whatever that may be. And that means it has to be mobile friendly and other things. And, sometimes that means it's a real-time experience. As you're walking by something, sometimes it means it could be a delayed experience, but it's about getting the right information to the right person or the right service to the right person. And that's kind of the real win. These are contextual services. They're adaptive. They should be learning, predictive, prescriptive. All those things we talked about before sort of definitionally when I kind of thought about the right time experience concept. But now we actually have the technology to do it. And I think that's the big win because we've been discussing it for a while, but just fundamentally we couldn't deliver on it. And that's changed now.
At Constellation, we talk a bit about this idea of like ambient experiences, right? It's those moments that just happen because that's what your customers want. Like you're talking, and I think right time experience is perfect, right? Because it is about that moment when if someone is walking by something, the last thing they want is a contrived, weirdly, overly personalized, I know you just walked by my business kind of, but they want something that is there, that's ambient, that kind of floats into their experience, that is contextual to them. And I think oftentimes we forget that piece, but we do have the technologies now. And of course, the hottest technology on the block that everyone wants to talk about is generative AI. Like, have you heard of this? Have you heard of this thing called generative AI? Maribel, have you heard anything about it?
Everybody's heard of this thing. Everybody is asking about this thing. So that's probably a good place to go because, really AI is one of the things that makes these ambient and right time experiences happen. And part of the issue is it's been a bit inaccessible to a lot of people, right? So how do we change that? And I think that's where generative AI came in to really kind of change it up the mix. But from what you're seeing, what do you think are some of the big benefits? Well, I guess maybe we could start with like a definition, like when we talk about generative AI, what are we talking about? Just in case you've been under a rock for the past 6 months and haven't heard anything.
Right. If you haven't been playing with those tools. So I think foundationally, when we're talking about generative AI, are those models and algorithms that are able to leverage into a large language model, right? So you're able to now not only ask a question in the way a user would organically ask a question. We're not having to go in with weird ampersands or having to think about how we want to construct a query. You can literally ask a question. And the beauty of generative AI is that all of those models and all of those transformers, all the great algorithms, all the data that's coming in from that lake is now able to actually, quite frankly, do exactly what the name says. For once in technology, we have something that does exactly what it says. It generates an answer that is also based on that common language, right? So whether it is a text-based form of generative AI, whether it is, an image-based form, we're now really able to take this massive schema of data, this massive pool of data that is literally the internet, and be able to pull from that not only knowledge, information to write everything from an answer to a question all the way to a new image of, now Liz Miller can have her headshot looking like she's an astronaut. All of those things where we're actually generating something quite new, whether it is a snippet or whether it's a very large file, we're now able to do that thanks to these, not only these large language models, but also the algorithms that are pulling all of these questions and answers together. It's kind of like, I just gave you like the Gen AI for Dummies answer. I think is probably the best way to describe it.
It's a good one though, right? That's the one that really kind of gets to the heart of the matter of why it's important, why it's different.
And I think that's exactly it, right? Because for the first time in a very long time, we had an instance of AI that wasn't scary. And I think that a lot of times for a lot of users, we've kind of gone through this really weird cultural hype cycle around AI in general, where people really start to think of it like Hollywood created it, right? Like it's this, hell's going to suddenly open the pod bay doors and we're going to get sucked out of our jobs forcibly because this sentient being is suddenly going to take over all of our roles and responsibilities. And what do we do? The introduction of ChatGPT into the public mindset really gave us, for kind of the first time, this really simple, easy, kind of fun thing that you could go in and you could ask it questions. And the reality is that consumers probably did us in technology the biggest solid ever by going and playing with the tool. They asked it questions. They asked silly questions like, what's the best way to bake chocolate chip cookies?
Right.
And it's not that they found a better answer to how do you bake chocolate chip cookies. It gave us more data and a far bigger graph to be able to hone in the answer. And it also gave us a massive population of people to hit that little thumbs up or that little thumbs down. Because the difference here with this AI is it requires human interaction to gauge whether it was the right answer or the wrong answer. Is this the right image or the wrong image? Is it the right screen? So all of the Gen AI that we're seeing right now, whether it is something like ChatGPT, whether it is something like any of the image generators that we've been seeing out there, it requires that there's a partnership between the AI, the model, the data, and the people to say, yes, that rocked, no, it was bad, right? So it took some of the stigma away. So suddenly people want it.
Yeah, so I think you're picking up on a couple of really important things, and we can kind of translate this to how it actually ends up in business as well. So the first thing that you picked up on is that conversational interface. And I think that conversational interface is really important because instead of you having a bunch of data scientists that know how to program things, they still might exist in your organization, but it means that the average person can go out and query something. The second is, instead of it just being a litany of data and information where you sort of have to still sift through it, it basically presents you with things. And that presentation actually streamlines the process of any workflow, be that a consumer one or a business one. And then you kind of mentioned the partnership. And I think the partnership is really interesting because this is where companies like Microsoft were talking about things like Copilot, that it's like you and the AI working together, right? So it's not that sometimes I think what people get hung up on in generative AI is they assume that is like the definitive answer and that there's no checking and modifying and other things, right? So there is still an onus on the individual to make sure that we know what's going on. But where I think it starts to become really cool is, it's cool now for everybody in a more general sense, but I think from a business sense, it starts to become really cool because instead of it just being like the randomness of all of the data in the internet, it starts to funnel down to being the data of your business, which, by the way, hopefully is more trustworthy, but still not fully trustworthy because we all know that we have different data in different parts of the organization that say different things. So you can't quite fully say that that's how it goes, but you can start to see like the power of these two things coming together. And then it's like basically querying your own info in a way that, Liz, you and I don't have to go to like 6 applications, pull out a number from each of them and then say, oh yeah, once I think about it and run a formula, it's 42. It's like, yeah, that can sort of happen, right?
Especially when you talk about business application of generative AI, right? Because you can ask a question differently, and because the AI on the back end is able to pull in and analyze the data differently, it's really given people this opportunity to ask different questions. So you brought up something like a Microsoft Copilot. It literally is exactly what it says it's going to do, right? It's your Copilot. But what can you do with the Copilot? It's allowed the individual marketer, the seller, the service agent to not ask questions as they had been trained to ask questions in technology. Kind of, think about it as like pre-Gen AI technology use. We were trained how to ask our systems and our solutions questions so that we could get an answer that we could either use or action upon. So we then had to kind of conform our way of speaking, a human's way, an individual's way of working, to work with the technologies that we were presented. But on something that is powered with generative AI, we're now allowed to just ask a question. We're allowed to ask a question in the way that not only we would ask a question, but we can also ask a question that has an experiment attached to it. We can ask a different question. We don't have to ask the same question that we always ask in the same format that we always ask it. We can now be like, well, what if we didn't do that campaign? What would it look like? Or what if I used this different audience segment? Have we ever talked to this audience segment? It allows the individual, and let's take the case of, let's say, a marketer. It allows a marketer to instead have to sit there and say, well, I'm going to send out X number of campaigns. I'm going to do this linear workflow, and I'm going to send out X number of campaigns, and I'm going to expect that it's going to do this. Suddenly, it allows a marketer to say, well, what were the most successful campaigns last year? And what if I defined success as number of high quality leads brought in? And if you can ask that, and you can have that kind of chain of thought, right? Like stream of consciousness experimentation, and you can ask that co-pilot that type of question and not be punished for asking a question differently, it fundamentally changes how we want to work. And I think it's what we got to see in the consumer reaction to a lot of these generative AI tools, right? Everyone went out and got their new headshot on Lensa, right? Everyone has gone and asked ChatGPT a question. That openness, that willing to experiment, the excitement over, wow, this technology gets me, is something that I hear over and over, whether it's a call center agent, whether it's a marketer. Wow, it finally gets me.
Well, and this gets back to that conversational, right? I mean, it's actual natural language, as opposed to you learning a set of commands, as opposed to you navigating down 5 menu items. And by the way, it's not just within one application. I think that's the interesting thing, right? So we've talked forever about breaking down our internal data silos and connect data, right? And lo and behold, we get to generative AI, and all of a sudden, generative AI is like, well, I'm going to look in the CRM system for this. I'm going to look in the customer support system for that. I'm going to look in the ERP system for something else, and I'm going to give you an answer. And I'm going to link to all these different sources that I got. So in case you're a little unsure, you can go back and see where the numbers and the insight was originated. But you don't have to go through that whole process of trying to figure out, okay, where is that data located, or how do I do that? And one of the things you were talking about, what it means for marketing, customer support. Most of the organizations you and I talk to, they're looking at like a third attrition. They always have new people. These new people don't know where to find things. They don't know the answers to questions. So, here we are, and it's like, well, if all of a sudden, this technology is mashed up with your business applications, and that application can then start surfacing information to a contact center person saying, oh, it sounds like the customer has this question. Here's what we think the answer is. Here's the supporting documentation. You could start to get into the, almost predictive, in the sense of, it looks like the challenge might be this. Here's some things you might want to walk them through. Talk about leveling the playing field and things like your customer service agent base, so that everybody can deliver a good experience. And then really kind of mapping that back to what your agents do well. This maybe we'll send calls over here to this agent because they know how to support that. But everybody has baseline information. I think this baseline information is so important. And then, the redundant, annoying stuff like taking all the notes. Who wants to take the notes after the call? Like if you're a salesperson, if you're a contact center agent, nobody, right? If that can automatically be
Maribel, I'm going to out the both of us. You and I have both been around this entire business long enough. We have been doing, whether it's marketing, sales, service, we've been doing this long enough. How long is the age-old conversation of, but sales reps aren't going to enter anything into CRM. If only we could find something that could get them all to do this. This has been like a decades-long challenge. And it's because sellers want to sell. They want to be successful at selling. They don't want to be successful at CRMing. There's a reason why there's no job called a CRMer, right? Like there's a reason behind that. So I think with things like generative AI and with things like AI, I think writ large, I think when we talk about right now, the hottest AI around, right, is generative AI. It's these large language models. But I think when we start to talk about AI projects and different places where AI becomes really important to apply, it really is in that ability to start connecting all of these dots that we have been banging our heads up against for decades, right? And I think that with generative AI, and I think the thing that we're looking at right now is a time period where we can start asking different questions of where AI can be implemented and then what we need to be able to implement it. Because I think if we're being very honest about AI and what we've been trying to do with it for the past, let's say, decade, we haven't had the right data. We haven't had enough data to really train these models to be important. I think what generative AI is showing us is the data is there. We can pull all of this data into a place, but we have to be constantly thinking. And I think this is going to be a very different addition to the checklist for everyone in CX is, am I constantly adding to this corpus of data?
Yeah, and is it the right corpus of data, right? So that's the other thing I think is really interesting. Like, if you really think about it, and if you think about the body of work known as the internet, there's we've got some pros and cons. Let's just say it that way, right? We also have like humanity in it, right? And humanity has, inherent biases. It just is, right? So we've got legal issues, we've got biases issues. By the way, we haven't talked at all about the whole concept of like, oh yeah, you need governance and compliance, and you need to understand like, is your data going to be put into like, yeah, like so people are calling Liz and I, for those of you that are out there, and they're asking questions like, hey, where's my data going? Is my data like in OpenAI now? Like, do I have to worry about that? Or is it being trained on OpenAI? And this actually started. So some of the things I think is funny, and it's not your first rodeo at this, nor mine, but generative AI actually isn't all that new. If you think back on it, we could go back and, GANs were, a thing a year or two ago. And now, because we put a conversational interface on it, I mean, that's probably the best thing that's happened, the conversational interface that allowed everybody to do something with it. All of a sudden now it's like, oh, we can do AI. Whereas before that, it was sort of the land of like data scientists or people that really understood like all the technology infrastructure. But now we're taking it to the next level, and we've got to ask real serious questions about like, well, is that the right data that we're working with? And then what happens to our data? And, the healthcare folks have been thinking about this for a while because they've been trying to figure out how do they pool data so that they can advance healthcare so that we can cure diseases. And that's a lot of private, secure data that you've got to deal with. So I still think that those are concerns, but I think, one of the things you need to do as an organization is just look at, well, what are the things you're buying? What's the data sharing? What kind of services are wrapped around this? So there's still a lot of nuance and still a lot of difficulty trying to figure out how you connect all your data sources to it, but it's a pretty exciting time when you think about it.
Absolutely, but I totally agree with you. And I mean, I think I think remember back to the age. Let's get in our time machine, Maribel, when everyone was having oh my God, what's going to happen with GDPR? Right? GDPR, it's going to ruin our emails. We're never going to be able to send an email again. But I look back on that time, and that really was one of the first times, that, certainly across CX, certainly across marketing. It's really one of the first times we had some significant, okay, but what? But what about questions around our data? And it wasn't, and I think the important thing to remember here is those were not conversations that should have been isolated to a single channel, a single deployment, a single body of data, GDPR, CCPA, CCPRA. It wasn't about the regulation, right? It's always been about the data and our responsibility to that data, which is really, and I've always argued that, data, we think about customer data as this mountain that we keep adding stuff onto, and like we're running a data decathlon up to the top of the hill, and that someone's going to wait for us up there and be like, oh my God, Maribel, you have the biggest mountain of data. This is amazing. When in reality, that mountain of data, that giant lake, swamp, whatever we're calling it today, is actually the digital manifestation of our customers. existing within our organization. And we have a responsibility to the same way that we have a responsibility to the customer that physically walks into our store, to respect them, to honor them, to have empathy with them, to deliver that amazing experience, to get that back and forth. We have that same responsibility with their digital manifestation being their data, right? And I think we have to keep those conversations going. To your point, where did this data come from? What are we doing with it? Is this really something? What's the end result that we want to get out of this? And I think that that's what people are really seeing. I asked ChatGPT a funny question. I actually asked ChatGPT the question of, why does AI fail?
Oh.
And it was like, and I was like, in 3 lines or less. And they're like, you don't have enough data. You don't have an actual strategy of what you want to implement. And you don't have the right people at the table. And I was like, okay, you've been trained well. Like, I was like, yes, young Padawan, this is a really good answer, right? Because that's the reality. And I think that what we're going to find is, as we use these tools more, and as people within our organizations are really excited about having a conversation that leads to something actionable, right? Human nature, it's what we want. They're going to engage more with these tools like Copilot, and they're going to ask new questions. They're going to ask different questions. They're going to solve new problems. But then, yes, there has to be that team that's also then having those real life questions of, okay, wait, where did we get this data? Wait, why do we need to pull this data? And the number one question that I hope every single customer goes, like, I want everyone to go, like, right now, as soon as this is over. Like, don't leave now to go do it. Do it when we're done talking. But like, it's not just about your functions data. And I think that's the other opportunity that we have here. We have systems that connect sales, marketing, service together as one giant CX ecosystem, which is awesome. Yet we somehow still think of the data as being very much individually focused on those 3 functions.
Okay. So here's another wrinkle to put into this, right? So, when we were just talking about this right time experience thing. So I used to say it was connected internally, which is still a problem, obviously, right? But it's also connected externally. And here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because part of what we're talking about with things like OpenAI and ChatGPT is that that's external data, that's internet data. But there's all kinds of really interesting business grade third-party data around pricing information, logistics information, reviews, all these things that you want to tap into, right? Yeah, so I think that when you look at what you're trying to create, the first job is to always make sure, like, the data cleanliness thing, okay, sadly, generative AI is not helping with data cleanliness, right? You still have to do the data cleanliness piece. So
AI is arguably helping with that, right? AI is arguably helping raise questions of, like, did you actually mean to have this?
Or you've got 2 versions of this, right? So it's like, which of these 2 versions is accurate? Because I've had plenty of people come to a room in a meeting and they have different versions of the data. And one person says it's 20 and the other person says it's 30. And you're like, well, whose data is correct, right? So the data are the data, but you have to make sure that they're the right data. But then you have to actually connect it to other data so that you get new experiences. Because I think that's one of the things that we're talking about. Like, if you were just replicating, everybody's modernizing their application estate, they're moving to cloud, they're looking at AI. But if you're doing the same things you did in 1987, like, really? That's just not going to work, right? So we have to figure out how do we reimagine the experience. And then that second point that you said when you asked AI about what goes wrong, you and I could do a series of podcasts to just talk about the number of times people don't have a goal. Like, people are like, well, I'm going to put me in some AI. And you're like, and what are you going to do with said AI? Because depending on what you're going to do with said whatever, different problems have different technology requirements. And then you also need to know, how on earth are you going to claim ROI on something? Because somebody's going to walk back and ask you 3 to 6 months from now, what do we get out of that? And if you don't have an answer, you got a problem. Whereas if you do, like, little land and expand things, you're usually okay. So
exactly. But that's what I also love about where we are with something like generative AI, because you can run that experiment, right? You can apply it in a certain space. You can apply it in the space of, okay, I'm a seller, right? I'm an organization with a large selling organization. I know that all my sellers are really just working in Outlook all day, right? Like, they're just in there. right?
Yep.
They're just sending emails. They got things going back and forth. And let's say, let's use Microsoft as the example here, right? Like they have Viva Sales, right? Okay, so I'm going to go into Viva Sales. I'm going to see all of these different correlations. I'm going to look at all these things. And now all of a sudden you can ask through your Copilot a different question. You can ask what might be going on, and you're going to get those actionable predictive insights because they have this giant generative AI model that's on the back end, because Copilot is back there stringing all of this data together to actually give your sellers something truly actionable. But what I love even more about that is that it takes that action. Okay, yeah, that worked. Great. The seller had a call. This is this amazing contract that came from it. And it reveals that information to the service agent that is just about to take a call from someone screaming and yelling that what they just bought did not work, right?
They need to know, that agent needs to know what to say. All right, so Liz, you started with asking me a question. I'm going to start with the wrap up with asking you a question. One or two pieces of advice for people listening about how they should be approaching generative AI.
That's a good one. I think the first piece of advice is absolutely go a little old school when it comes to something this new school, and go back to the strategy, right? Go back to asking what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And who does this benefit? And the who does this benefit, it's okay if profit is what is benefited. It's okay if what you want to benefit is, I just wanted to give 5 minutes back to my people. That's okay. Just have that listed out, right? Have had that conversation, have that thought process through your mind. I think the other real issue here is really think through all the data sources through which you can have something become actionable. Create your dream data list. And it might be everything that's internal. Please, for the love, if you are in marketing, include things like contact center, call data. Do I have the transcripts? Not just do I have the sentiment, happy, yes, were they, not just the NPS score. I mean, what did that customer say? What was that next step? So you can start to see patterns. So you can start to see, what can I do next in crafting these journeys that might even help the call center agent or help the customer not ever have to call, right? It becomes that enterprise-wide team sport. The third thing is, when it comes to that team sport, understand that AI is a team member. It's not the whole team. Right? Mm-hmm. AI isn't your coach. AI hasn't taken over everyone on the team. AI is, yes, can switch between being, the water girl to the quarterback to AI can switch positions faster than any of us can, right? But AI is truly your co-pilot. It's not something that takes over. So lose some of that stigma. How about you? What are the pieces of advice you want to leave everyone with?
Well, gosh, you took a lot of the good ones, and we've already talked about some of them already. But let me see if I can add a few things. Trust but verify. So to make sure that the sources and if it ended up being right. The second one is, and this was an AI thing in general, I would say, not just a generative AI thing, and that's that they are learning models, but you have to make sure that they are learning and moving in the right direction. Maybe that's also another part of trust and verify. But, is the model acting the way that you want it to? And then I think also, does it represent the world you want it to represent? Because it may be acting the way you want it to, but you may decide that you don't have representative data for the things that you're trying to do. So you might need to create some synthetic data to actually create the outcomes that you want. And then the third thing I'd say, and this is kind of one of the exciting things about it in my mind, is that sometimes people have a lot of data, sometimes people have no data. But regardless of which of those you're in, there's an opportunity to work with the existing models that there are today, because they have so much data, to get you to a place where you can do something. So basically everybody can do something now with AI, and that may not have been fully true, say 2 years ago, but I think now we could legitimately say that. So go out and experiment and see what you can do with it. See how it can improve your business.
Well, with that, my friend, I think we've given hopefully a lot of food for thought, but hopefully a message that, AI isn't going to open the pod bay doors and kick us out into space. So that's one, right? It's a whole lot of fun, right? I think it's a whole lot of fun to work with, but I think it opens up a whole lot of doors, especially across CX, right? I have not seen a time where, I don't know about you, I'm really excited about what the next year, what the next month.
That would be a better time to be in CX and even in sales, right? So I think sales and CX get a huge boost from this. So, and we could go on, I mean, there's a whole other thing we could do on healthcare if we wanted to, because that's like another thing, but
exactly.
It's a great time. Test it out, make sure that, you're responsible about how you do it, but it can really make
Go have fun. Thanks for being with us, everyone.